Well, folks, today we are going to be talking about the 2028 presidential election, and specifically what a potential landslide victory for the Republican Party in the 2028 presidential election would look like. This would be an election that would reshape America's political landscape, delivering a mandate for conservative governance for the next 4 years. And a landslide would require of the Republican Party flipping key states, leveraging the GOP momentum from 2024, and capitalizing on voter priorities like the economy, like security, like border security, like immigration. But today we are going to be breaking down what Republicans need to do to secure this landslide and which states the GOP would need to flip to dominate in an electoral college victory. So let's jump into it. So first, we're going to start off on the governance side. What would Republicans need to do over the next 4 years in order to really win in a landslide victory in 2028? They would need to deliver on key promises that President Trump ran on in his 2024 re-election bid. There would be key provisions that would be passed. And to be honest, we got a lot of those key provisions in President Trump's one big, beautiful bill. Now, as much as some people don't like it, I'm not the world's biggest fan of it. Look, I think that there's a lot of issues with it, but I also think there's a lot of good. Do I think that the good outweighs the bad? 100%. Absolutely. Not passing this bill would be much more destructive to the Republican Party and to the American economy than passing this bill ever will be. But the first thing comes down to the economy. It's the economy, stupid. The Republican Party must focus on tax cuts, deregulation, policies that drove growth under President Trump's first term. And that's exactly what he got in his one big, beautiful bill. Yes, we permanently extended lower marginal tax rates. We increased the standard deduction for couples by $1,500 in 2025 and make it permanent. A lower or a higher standard deduction with inflation adjustments. We permanently increase the child tax credit. That's huge for young families. Huge. There's a tax credit for paid family and medical leave. Huge credit. Talk about no tax on overtime, no tax on tip, no tax on car loans for vehicles that were built in America. And also these Trump accounts. Every child born between 2024 and 2028 will receive a tax advantage savings account with a $1,000 contribution from the federal government. Only U.S. citizens qualify for this, but this is huge. These are huge follow-throughs on President Trump's agenda. Obviously, yes, there was huge, and I mean massive, that we haven't seen something like this since Bill Clinton. Serious welfare reform, massive welfare reform in this bill, which was very much needed when it came down to Medicaid. Talking about provider taxes, huge adjustments to that. Not allowing states to basically siphon money from the federal government to pay for their fair share of Medicaid. And then requiring people, able-bodied adults, to work 20 hours a week, volunteer, or work 20 hours a week. That's what you need to do. These were huge things. And people want to talk about how this was cut in Medicaid. It wasn't. There are no cuts to Medicaid in here. There are regulations based around who can get it. And, there's a lot of people who want to claim that, basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to drown people in paperwork. Therefore, they're not going to get the coverage they need. First of all, that's sick, gross, and disgusting that someone would even consider that is the motive behind why there was welfare reform in this bill. That's just disgusting to begin with. Number two, you have to make sure, and this goes across the board, this is what happened when Bill Clinton, go back to the 90s, massive welfare reform under a Democrat, Bill Clinton. The reality is that if you want the taxpayers to either pay for your premiums, your co-pays, and all of your medical procedures, or to seriously, and I mean seriously, subsidize the premium that you pay every month for your health insurance, it is only fair that you have to fill out paperwork. I'm sorry you don't want to fill out, 5 pages worth of paperwork. I'm sorry. You either can fill out the 5 pages of paperwork or you can pay for it yourself. But guess what? When you get health insurance through the private market or through an employer, you still have to fill out a lot of paperwork. Let's not sit here and pretend that this has something to do with, we're going to try and limit people because they're either going to be too stupid, too busy, whatever the case is, to fill the paperwork out. No, I think the people who deserve Medicaid are very much competent to do this, and they will do this. If they need it, they will do this. But if you want the taxpayer to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars in the event that something goes wrong with you, I'm sorry you have to fill out an extra 4 pages of paperwork. I'm not really, but like, seriously. Stop clutching your pearls right now. You know, the average health insurance policy for a family in America is like almost $2,000 a month. It's like $25,000 a year. One of the biggest expenses that you're ever going to face in your life is insurance. But the reality is if you want that paid for free, if you want that for free, you have to fill out paperwork. Yes, that's true. That's true. But the reality about the One Big Beautiful Bill is that it's not popular right now. There are a lot of provisions inside of this bill that are popular. But the bill itself is not popular according to almost all polling. And this is where Republicans need to start selling. They need to sell this bill. They need to go on the offensive. They need to get their face out in front of the media. They need to start selling this bill before the midterms. Don't wait until June of next year to start selling this bill. You're already behind the curveball. Because there's an old saying, if you're explaining, you're losing. Get out in front of this. Get out in front of exactly what this bill is doing. That's exactly what we need to see happen. Get out in front of it. If you want to win in 2028, if you want to win in 2026, you need to do that. And because the reality is the job creation and wage growth that will come from this bill appeals to working class voters. The reality is our inflation and the reason our national debt is so out of whack, it's not because we give tax cuts. No. It's because we have a socialist-style welfare state in the United States that was not set up properly, that did not have any forethought that was put into it. And now we're paying, over $1 trillion a year on our national debt. We're paying $1 trillion a year in entitlement programs. It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous. And this is why Obamacare needed to be repealed and we needed to go back to state risk pools. That's the reality. And then the federal government would just subsidize or finance those state risk pools. That's how you can keep insurance for everyone else lower. They can go through proper underwriting, keep it lower for everyone else. And then the people who are high risk are in a high risk pool. And it's subsidized by the federal government. That keeps premiums lower for everyone across the board. But in including this bill, you have massive money for immigration enforcement and border security. Let's try and find this. A lot for defense, but we're going to be talking about border security right now. Look, this continues aggressive immigration enforcement, building on the voters' concerns in 2024 about the border. First, you also need to promote things like the SAVE Act to ensure that voter ID and there's restored trust in our elections to begin with. The SAVE Act must be passed. We need to show voter ID if you're going to vote. You need it to rent a car. You need it to get a glass of wine when you go out to eat. If you want to buy spray paint, you need an ID. But you can vote in a federal election without an ID because that's racist if you ask for an ID, if you didn't know that. But look at this. The reality is that under President Trump, we have some of the lowest border encounters in history ever. Last month, they had the lowest border encounters at our southern border that was ever been recorded. But included in this One Big Beautiful Bill, $45 billion to expand the capacity to detain immigrants that are taken into custody. $45 billion to build a border wall on our southern border. 10 years after Trump asked for it, he's finally getting his one big, beautiful wall, I guess you could say. $31 billion to hire, train, and transport and facilitate legal resources to carry out immigration enforcement. Grants to local and state governments for enforcement of security around major events for immigration. This is huge. This is huge. We're either going to have more judges to process these immigration bids faster. They're going to have more capacity to hold on to illegal immigrants. There is huge pieces of Trump's legislative policies or agenda that were passed in this bill. Then you want to talk about fossil fuel production, lower gas prices, a key issue in swing states. Because we know that green energy mandates are costly and unrealistic. We need pragmatic governance when it comes to green energy. I have no problem starting to include green energies in our grid. No problem with that. But the idea that we're going to subsidize it and it's all of a sudden going to take over natural gas and coal and oil by 2030, you are stoned. You have smoked so much crack, you are beyond, you're gone. You are not coming back from that. Because at the end of the day, national security and energy are so tied together. We need to be able to produce our own energy. It is a national security risk if we're going to rely on China or Canada. Look, if we buy a million barrels from Canada a day, whatever. But if we can produce in-house 70, 80% of what we need, we know that in a time of need, we can obviously ramp that up. And I think that on the Republican side, the Republican Party, you start looking at an actual election now. They need to rally behind a nominee who brings common sense governance to the Republican Party. And the Republican Party has a lot going when it comes to common sense governance. Don't get me wrong. But you need someone who can bridge the more conservative MAGA faction of the party and more traditional establishment GOP figures. I think someone like a DeSantis, I think someone like a J.D. Vance could do that. And I don't think that we need to have a long, drawn-out primary. Look, we need to have a primary, no doubt about that. But this should not drag on. If it is clear that someone is leading, we need to coalesce around a candidate. We need to make sure they win in the general election. We can nitpick, J.D. Vance, Ron DeSantis, RFK Jr., Marco Rubio. Okay, who's going to be our nominee? Okay, but that doesn't matter if you lose the general election. Doesn't matter one bit. But you also need to be able to leverage Donald Trump's influence without alienating voters and not even alienating them, bringing certain voters back into the fold. Voters that are never Trumpers, voters that would not vote for President Trump. I think you need to have a candidate who can bring those people back into the fold. You need to be able to cross across party lines. You need to be able to bring in independents. You need to bring in moderate voters, disenfranchised Democrats, Democrats in general. That's how you win. And you can see right now, J.D. Vance clearly is leading in almost every single poll at roughly 45%. Now, it's kind of skewed because Donald Trump Jr. is in here. He's not running. How does this redistribute? I'm guessing a lot to Vance, Rubio, and DeSantis, maybe RFK Jr. But ultimately, you can see he clearly is leading in every single poll that Donald Trump is not in. Obviously, we know Donald Trump cannot run in 2028. He is term limited. But now we're going to jump over and look at an actual election map, how Republicans and Democrats will turn out in this election, what will need to happen, and even who's going to be the weakest candidate for the Democrat Party. How could we see that happen? So obviously, we'll start off with the safe states. There are going to be states like California, Oregon, Washington, and Hawaii. Those are a Democrat stronghold. We saw in 2024, they each voted for Kamala Harris by double digits. Only one of them broke the 20-point threshold, which you go back to 2020. Biden won California by almost 30 points. But only 20 points, Harris won it in 2024. Now, to include for safe Democrat seats, that will be places like Colorado, like Illinois, like Vermont, Connecticut, Delaware, Massachusetts, Maryland, D.C., and Rhode Island. We will look at Maine's first congressional district will be a safe Democrat seat going into 2028. Now, on the Republican side, they have many more states that will be safe Republican seats. Idaho, Utah, Wyoming, Montana, the Dakotas. We're going to look at Nebraska at large, Nebraska's third and first congressional district. First actually may be a little closer. You can look here. Trump only won it by 13 points. Overall, he won Nebraska's third by 53 percentage points. Won overall by about 20 percentage points. If it breaks 15, I think if it's a landslide year for Republicans, this would be a safe Republican district. Kansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Louisiana, Arkansas, Missouri, basically then all of the South, except the swing states of Georgia, North Carolina. Oops, not Virginia. Unfortunately, Virginia will not be a safe Republican seat in 2028. But this would be the map right off of the bat safe if we're looking at a landslide victory for the Republican Party, including Alaska. This puts Republicans at 212, Democrats at 149. Now we'll fill in the likely Democrat seats. Those would be places like New Mexico. Minnesota will be a lean seat. Maine, their at-large will go to the Democrats by a pretty safe margin, I assume, upwards of 5 to 10 percentage points. You look at a place like Virginia. I think if we're looking at and let's fill this out first, how I think it would go in a normal election year. I think you would see Virginia wouldn't be super, super close. Minnesota, maybe even a little further out of reach than it is right now. I think Nevada in a normal year, in Arizona will have a slight tilt to the Republican Party. I think that's the same thing with North Carolina, especially if you see someone like Pete Buttigieg, who, to be honest with you, right now appears to be leading. Look, without Harris on the ticket, Buttigieg leads with 15 points. We know that Buttigieg does not have any appeal to minority voters. What is that going to look like when turnout is depressed in places like North Carolina, like Georgia, like Pennsylvania, that hold huge amounts of African Americans? Huge amounts. That's just a reality. What is it going to look like? You look at Iowa. This will be a likely Republican seat as well. New York, this will be a likely Democrat seat. Now, this is probably how it would turn out. Republicans will probably win Maine's 2nd congressional district. I say in a good year, or just a standard year, Democrats win by a pretty close margin. I think even if Vance is the nominee. But yeah, we're looking New Jersey, probably similar. I guess we could go within 5 points. You could say that. But this is kind of where we would be at in a typical election year. Republicans at 252, Democrats at 225. Yes, you could say North Carolina maybe doesn't have as red of a tilt to it as maybe Nevada or Arizona, but those are safe to say. Now, in a Republican landslide, what are we looking at? First of all, I think you're seeing like places like Oregon and California get in a little closer. Now, we know when it was close in 24, California didn't go below the 15-point margin. They did drop almost 10 percentage points, but still they didn't get below that 15. I think if Republicans are doing very well, landslide election, we're under 15 points in California. 10 to 15 points you're looking at. I think the same thing will happen in Colorado. You'll see drop below 15%. Now, obviously, Harris only won it by 11%, much different than Biden's 13%, and Hillary Clinton that only won it by 4 points in 2016. Colorado has shifted a lot to the left. I think that you'd see it get within 10 to 15 points. I don't think it's dropping lower than that. I think New Mexico would get closer in this election, along with Washington State would get a lot closer. I think in a Republican landslide, you're going to see slight victories in places like New Hampshire. I think you can see Maine's 1st congressional district getting much, much closer. You see places like New Jersey becoming a seat that is only voting for the Democrats by maybe a point. Republicans win in Georgia. They run a candidate that is that has appeal like Brian Kemp does in the state of Georgia. He can appeal to the moderates. He can appeal to the MAGA base at the same time when you appeal to the suburban women, the suburban men, the much more progressive Atlanta metro area. The same thing will happen in North Carolina. Like a Republican landslide means there's extremely depressed turnout among the African American community, and I think they will play big. Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, Pennsylvania. We know this is a state that had a voter registration advantage for the Democrat Party of almost 1 million votes in 2016. Now, they barely are struggling to maintain their voter registration advantage of like 75,000 votes. Republicans have made up. They've made up since 2016. Roughly 900,000 voters. 900,000 voters. You think of that. In one state, in the most consequential state in America, in the electorate right now. That's the reality that you're staring down right now. And I think you want to talk about Nevada and Arizona. Trump's winning Nevada by, I don't know if double-digit points. I think Arizona gets to double-digit points. We know that both in Arizona and in Nevada, there's massive support among these Hispanic Americans. Right now, there are over 2 million Hispanics in the state of Arizona. In the state of Arizona right now. And then if you're looking for the state of Nevada, let's see if we can find it on here. Where do we have Nevada at? You can see right here in Nevada, they have almost a million Hispanic Americans that live there. They make up roughly 1/3 of the electorate, 28.7% of the electorate, according to the census in 2020. Look, the same thing. Look in New Jersey, 2 million. They make up a fifth of the electorate in New Jersey. If you're seeing massive swings among the Hispanic community, which you saw in 2024, Hispanics are voting for Trump in the Republican Party in droves that we've never seen before. We've never seen this before. You could see New Jersey get extremely close. I think Vermont stays about as blue as you can get, especially this kind of New England area up here. I don't think it's going to shift a lot. I think you're going to see it through the rest of America shift a lot. But I think in New Jersey, you could see it happen. Do you think you could see New York get closer? We saw what happened in the gubernatorial election. Look, Harris wins by only 12 percentage points in 24. Gubernatorial election in 2022, Lee Zeldin comes within 6 points of defeating Kathy Hochul. 6 points. Remember, this is a state that voted for Joe Biden by 23 points. It voted for Hillary Clinton by 22. This has been a Democrat stronghold. Obama won it by almost 30, 27. Like, this is a Democrat stronghold. You haven't seen margins this bad in New York. Goodness, how far back can we go? Look, Clinton's winning. We haven't 15 back in 92. Look at this. Dukakis wins it by 4.1 points. 1988 was the last time we saw that close of a margin there. That's what you're looking at. And I think clearly Republicans would sweep the battleground states of Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, North Carolina, Georgia, Arizona, Nevada, if there was a landslide victory in 2028. I think Republicans will pick up places like New Hampshire. I think places like Virginia will get extremely close. Could Republicans pick up Virginia by a point? Could they pick up places like New Jersey by a point? I think if you're looking at a landslide victory, I think that is very, very likely. Minnesota, maybe you see Minnesota get super close in a landslide victory for the Republican Party. Do you see them winning Minnesota by a point? Maybe they continue. They flip Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. Instead of being a blue stronghold, this will be a slight Republican advantage here. Slight Republican advantage. But I think this is what you're looking at. If Republicans are going to have a landslide victory in 2028, this is what it's going to look like. You know, could you see places like New Mexico get even closer? Could you see Minnesota flipping? Virginia flipping? Could you see New Mexico flip? Maybe you could. You see, New Hampshire, I think New Hampshire would 100% flip if it's a landslide victory. A landslide victory. But to wrap it up, folks, a 2028 presidential election landslide victory for the Republican Party hinges on smart governance. Selling the one big beautiful bill. Going on the offensive and selling it right now. Focus on the economy. Security, unity, border security, immigration, taxes. The economy, that is what voters care about. You focus on it. It's going to hinge on building out party infrastructure in places like Minnesota, where the party infrastructure is pathetic, along with New Jersey, which has gotten a lot better in recent years. Virginia as well, following on Glenn Youngkin's playbook on how you win in Virginia. It's on parental rights, education. That's how you win in Virginia. But the GOP, they must stay disciplined, leverage the momentum from the 2024 election, pick a candidate who embodies conservative values without the division. I think, honestly, if you're looking, you either see someone like a Marco Rubio or a Ron DeSantis. If I'm being 100% honest, this is who I see. I think the best, if we're talking about unifying candidates in the Republican, and honestly, I just don't know. Will J.D. Vance have that appeal to more moderates in the Republican Party? I don't know. I simply just don't know. I think he needs to be tested a lot more. But yeah, do you think someone like a DeSantis, like a Vance, like a Rubio could appeal to those moderate voters, to the independents, to the disenfranchised Democrat voters? But let me know, what do you think the GOP needs to do for a landslide victory in 2028? Drop your thoughts down below. And always, folks, don't forget to drop down below, hit that subscribe button, smash that like button. Make sure you never miss another video from us again in the future. And folks, we will catch you next time.